We're diving deep into a topic that's been kind of inescapable lately. It's been in the headlines, it's been hitting our wallets. It's inflation. I mean, you've seen it yourself, right? Groceries getting pricier, that new phone feeling a little more out of reach. Maybe you've even had to rethink a vacation or two. We're all feeling it, but what exactly is inflation, and why is everyone making such a fuss about it?
Well, it all starts with that feeling you just mentioned, that squeeze we feel when prices creep up. Basically, inflation is just the rate at which prices for things, goods and services, increase over time. And I know, we all get a little uneasy seeing those numbers go up. But here's the thing. A little bit of inflation, believe it or not, can actually be a good sign. It can be a sign of a healthy economy.
Okay, wait, hold on a sec. You're telling me higher prices are a good thing. How does that work?
Think of it this way. Let's say there's a little inflation, like that 2% most governments aim for.
Hmm.
It kind of nudges people to spend their money now rather than later. I mean, if you know that new phone is probably going to cost more next year, why wait, right?
Okay, yeah, I get that. I've definitely been guilty of that. Buy it now before it's even more expensive thinking.
Exactly. And when everyone's thinking that way, it kicks off this ripple effect. More spending means businesses are doing better, bringing in more money, and that lets them do things like invest, expand, hire more people.
So it's like this chain reaction boosting the whole economy.
Exactly. And here's where wages come into the picture. For this whole cycle to really work its magic, wages need to be rising along with those prices. If your paycheck is keeping up with the rising cost of living, you're good. You're maintaining your purchasing power. You can keep contributing to all that economic momentum.
That makes sense, but it sounds like a pretty delicate balance. What happens when something throws that system off?
Well, that's where things get really interesting, and it's what we've been seeing play out recently. When you have big disruptions, things like supply chain problems, or even companies just jacking up prices more than they need to, that nice balance gets thrown out of whack. Prices shoot up, and if wages don't follow suit, people start having a tough time.
Right. It's like the system goes from a healthy jog to this crazy sprint, and a lot of people get left behind.
That's a great way to put it. And that's when governments and central banks step in with their tools, trying to kind of slow things down, get inflation back under control.
Yeah, one of the big tools they use is interest rates. You know the numbers that determine how much it costs to borrow money for things like a house or a car? When a government or a central bank raises interest rates, it makes borrowing more expensive, which can help slow down spending. And that can help cool things down, ease that inflationary pressure.
It's like tapping the brakes on the economy.
Exactly. But like any break, it can be a little jarring. Higher interest rates make it tougher for folks to get those loans, like for a house or a car. And businesses might think twice about investing or expanding when borrowing is more expensive. It's a real balancing act.
It sounds like finding that sweet spot is crucial. And speaking of finding a balance, our source material dives into this concept of deflation, which sounds like the flip side of inflation, right? Right, deflation is when prices actually start going down. And at first you might think, hey, cheaper stuff, what's not to like? Huh. But that's where things get tricky and potentially dangerous.
Okay, color me intrigued. What's the downside of things getting cheaper?
Okay, imagine you're thinking about buying a new TV, and you know prices are going to drop even more next month. Are you going to rush out and buy it today?
Probably not. I'd wait for a better deal.
Exactly. And that's the catch with deflation. When everyone starts holding off on buying things, businesses start hurting. Sales drop, their profits shrink, and then they have to cut costs, which often means people lose their jobs.
So instead of that positive cycle of growth and spending we were talking about before, deflation sets off a downward spiral.
Exactly. People lose their jobs, and those who still have jobs get worried about losing theirs. And then everyone tightens their belts, which just makes demand drop even more. It can be like quicksand, dragging the whole economy down with it.
Our source material actually uses this analogy of an economic black hole, which paints a pretty vivid picture, I gotta say. It sounds like once an economy gets sucked into that deflationary spiral, it's really tough to pull out of it.
It really is. And to make things even tougher, governments have fewer tools to fight deflation compared to inflation. It's like trying to push a boulder uphill. The video actually brings up Japan as an example, a country that's been dealing with deflation for decades.
So if deflation is this big threat lurking out there, it makes sense why that 2% inflation target is so important. It's like a buffer, a safety net, to keep us from falling into that deflationary abyss.
Exactly. It gives us a little wiggle room. It acknowledges that economies are complex. They don't always behave in a predictable way. That little upward pressure on prices, it helps keep that healthy cycle of spending and growth going without veering into dangerous territory.
This has been a real eye-opener. I'm starting to see why a little inflation isn't necessarily the bad guy we often make it out to be.
And remember, it's not just about those prices going up. It's about making sure wages are keeping pace so that everyone benefits from that growth, not just a select few.
Yeah, it really drives home the point that economics isn't just about like numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about real people, their lives, how all these forces affect them day to day.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important to get a handle on these concepts, to look beyond just the headlines, Because when we see those inflation numbers, those big scary numbers, it's easy to get swept up in all the doom and gloom. But taking this deep dive, it shows us there's another side to the story. There's a deeper, more nuanced way to understand how inflation fits into a healthy economy.
Right. It's like we've peeled back the layers and found out that this thing we thought was the villain. Well, maybe it's not so villainous after all.
Exactly. Its role is to encourage growth,
Yeah.
to push for innovation, to keep the economy moving and changing.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. If prices are slowly rising, businesses have to keep on their toes. They have to keep improving, coming up with new products and services. They have to find ways to stay ahead of the game.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's like that gentle pressure of inflation keeps the whole economic engine humming.
Precisely. And like we've been talking about, the key is making sure wages are keeping pace. So everyone benefits from that progress, not just a small group.
So, as we wrap things up here, what are the big takeaways from our deep dive into the world of inflation?
Well, first off, we've learned that a little inflation isn't always a bad thing. In fact, it can be a sign of a healthy economy, driving innovation and growth.
And we've seen how deflation, that flip side of inflation, it can be a real danger, leading to that downward spiral that's so hard to break free from.
Exactly. That's why governments try to hit that sweet spot, that 2% inflation target. It's like a buffer against deflation while still promoting a dynamic economy.
But maybe the biggest takeaway here, it's that economics, it's not just about numbers, it's about people.
Couldn't agree more. A healthy economy, it's not just about low inflation, it's about whether wages are growing enough for people to maintain their standard of living, to thrive.
This deep dive has given me a whole new way to think about inflation, and it leaves me with a question for our listeners. Now that we've explored why a bit of inflation can be a good thing, what are your thoughts on wages where you live? Are they keeping up with inflation in a way that benefits everyone?
That's a really important question. It's something each of us needs to consider. As we move forward, let's stay informed, engage in these conversations. Let's push for policies that create a fair and inclusive economy, an economy where everybody benefits from growth.
That's a great thought to leave us with. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of inflation. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep those economic wheels turning.